outside.
Alright.
Think outside.
Okay.
Assemble yourself. Okay, welcome back everybody. So we have no confidence in Simon Coveney or government, and we'll be voting no confidence in Simon Coveney today. The truth is that Simon Coveney told a pack of lies to the Oireachtas Committee to try to cover up what was clearly a made-up job for a political insider in the form of Catherine Zappone. He said Catherine Zappone had not lobbied for the position that was then created for her, when the evidence very clearly points to the fact that she was banging down the door looking for that or any job. He said that he did not promise her any job, he didn't award her any job before it coming to Cabinet, when in actual fact, a couple of months before it coming to Cabinet, it's very clear from Catherine Zappone's messages that she thought she had been promised a job, and Simon Coveney did nothing to dissuade her from that fact. He then told the Oireachtas Committee that he had deleted the text messages that contained the evidence of this on the basis of running out of data in his phone, which was a completely incredible, unbelievable story in this day and age when people have iPhones with many gigabytes of memory. And so then he changed his story to the idea that his phone had been hacked and therefore had to remove it, had to delete the text messages. When he was asked for details about the hacking of his phone, instead he talked about a phishing attack, which is a different thing. He was relying on people not knowing the difference, but there was no suggestion previously that any hacker ever had any evidence of his phone, any access to data on his phone. And there's also a point which was made, I thought, well by Pat Leahy, I think last weekend, that actually his story was that he deletes text messages from his phone because of the danger of hackers accessing them. However, he doesn't delete government business because that would be in breach of the FOI Act. And that leads with the completely illogical position that Simon Coveney is worried about hackers accessing his phone, but doesn't delete any of the important information that hackers may be seeking to access, and deletes the unimportant personal stuff. And of course we know that actually he did breach the FOI Act because he did delete text messages relating to the appointment of Catherine Zappone back and forth with the Taoiseach, clearly government business, clearly covered by the FOI Act. So he was involved in those lies to cover up and to try to hide what is a continuation of a culture of cronyism, which exists very clearly within Fine Gael, but also in Fianna Fáil. That isn't the only reason we'll be voting no confidence in Simon Coveney, though. We have no confidence in the government generally in relation to their ability to tackle any of the crises facing ordinary people, from housing, climate change, workers' rights. And just one point on that is Simon Coveney's personal role in relation to the creation of the housing crisis that we now have. He was formerly Minister responsible for housing. In that role, he allowed the property developers to effectively write the laws in relation to the strategic housing developments that were then used by all these major investors to bypass any proper planning process. He promised back at the start of 2017 that by July of 2017 there would be no more homeless families and children in hotels or B&Bs. We're over 4 years on, and of course there's still very many in those situations. And in general, his whole policy was to encourage coming into the market, the REITs, the vulture funds, etc. His whole policy was to drive in that direction. And the final reason in terms of Simon Coveney personally and his role as a minister is in relation to his role as Defence Minister and his failure to meet with the victims, survivors of sexual abuse within the Army, the women of honour described in the RTE primetime, that his failure to meet with them in terms of drawing up the terms of reference for an inquiry. So for all of those reasons and a general failure of the government, we'll be voting no confidence in Simon Coveney. And those of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party who vote confidence in Coveney are voting to endorse a continuation of cronyism. They're voting to endorse a continuation of the housing crisis and the failed policies of this government.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's depressing about the instance of cronyism involving Simon Coveney is that it shows a government whose priorities are more focused on cronyism and careerism rather than on the very pressing issues that are concerning people in this country at the moment, particularly the severe and worsening housing crisis. And one of the things we want to do in this new Dail term is continue to pursue this government over its absolutely abysmal failure to address the housing crisis. And the most recent instance of this, which we need to really ring the alarm bells this week about, is the student accommodation crisis. So young people who've already gone through an incredibly hard time under COVID, having to study online, not enjoy the student experience, or having to face the extraordinary stress around the Leaving Cert, the CAO points race, have now arrived back into college to face an unprecedented student accommodation crisis. Thousands and thousands of students arriving back to college or entering college for the first time with absolutely no affordable student accommodation available to them. The student unions in universities and colleges across the country are absolutely overwhelmed with unprecedented numbers of students who cannot find affordable accommodation. And by the way, this does link to the priorities that were set by Simon Coveney when he was a housing minister, because this unprecedented student accommodation crisis comes when there has been a frenzy and proliferation of high-end, luxury, completely unaffordable student accommodation being built all over the city and, in many cases, on college campuses. I was just off the phone from the student union in UCD, where they're describing how on-campus student accommodation, which is being built, is now luxury accommodation that they're charging between 12 and 15,000 euro a year. So the price of student accommodation is being bid up by private investors who build student accommodation, which is completely unaffordable, totally profit orientated, all around this city and other parts of the country, but ordinary students absolutely cannot afford it. And even the affordable accommodation that used to exist on campus has now been bid up in price because universities are using the money they can generate from previously built student accommodation to finance the construction of much more expensive student accommodation that's ranging to 15,000 euro a year. So all the hardships that young people have gone through in terms of the Leaving Cert, not being able to go into college, have now been compounded by a massive student accommodation crisis that students are facing in this city, in Galway, in Cork, in Waterford, and many other places across the country. It's unacceptable. What we need, as a matter of urgency, as well as addressing the generality of the housing crisis in terms of unaffordable rents, the lack of public and affordable housing, the lack of protections for tenants, we urgently need a massive programme of student affordable accommodation on campus to be built so that the young people who've suffered so severely during COVID can at least have some sort of decent, secure experience when they're going through college. So this will be an issue we'll be highlighting very strongly this week.
Morning everybody. I just spoke at the Health Committee in relation to a number of issues, but one of the issues around health safety in primary schools, and there was an article in the Irish Examiner this morning in relation to I suppose safety in primary schools and CO2 monitors, the lack of CO2 monitors, and in the last 2 weeks up to 50% of schools in the south of Ireland have had one COVID case. So obviously I asked NIAC in relation to are they satisfied with the measures the government have put in place? They said they were. You know, children have largely been come up unscathed in relation to the disease, in relation to death. But obviously, you know, that could change. So that was one of the main points I brought up today in relation to Neville and NIAC.
So I just want to say a few words about the America's Cup. So I represent the Cork North Central constituency, and in my constituency you have sports teams, clubs who are forced to go out to fundraise. to buy their own kit. You have young people who are forced to wait for a year and more just to have access to mental health services as we emerge from the pandemic. So what I want to say is that if the government are going to spend 150 million euro on hosting an international yacht race, then they have no excuse whatsoever and cannot continue underfunding grassroots sports groups, mental health services for young people and the like. The communities that I represent and the young people that I represent are not prepared to and are not going to go to the back of the queue. That's it.
Questions?
Said it all.
Yeah, it covers everything.
And
Right.
where does the economic dignity bill stand at the minute? I know just before the break it was in committee, there was a bit of long fingering, but where are we going into the new term?
Yeah, so I've written to Kieran Corla asking, obviously trying to facilitate a special Oireachtas committee in relation to the recommendation from the Justice Committee. So the Justice Committee made a recommendation that a special Oireachtas committee should be set up. Now, in principle, I'm not against it, but the way it was deliberated, very, very disappointed, and I kind of conveyed that with Kieran Corla. So hopefully the Committee for Standing Orders and Dail Reform, hopefully get that right, Bob?
That's mine.
Okay, you're on it. I've written to them, and hopefully they will facilitate a special Oireachtas committee to look at the kind of, I suppose, the complex issue of assisted dying. But early next year, I intend to bring a new bill forward in relation to some of the, I suppose, recommendations that the OPLA have stated, and to kind of bring the issue much more to the fore, and obviously counteract some of the issues that come against the OPLA recommendation.
Just a separate issue of housing then, we've seen that the central bank hasn't approved the shared equity scheme. Just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, we are extremely critical of the shared equity scheme because it is about continuing to try and source affordable housing from a private market where the prices are completely out of control, and simply sort of extending credit for people to buy housing that is completely unaffordable is not a sustainable way to deal with the housing crisis, and creates the danger of repeating the mistakes of the Celtic Tiger, pumping up credit and actually increasing the prices of housing. So I think the central bank are right, but I think it's another indication of how this government has not broken from the failed policy of trying to address the crisis in housing, and particularly the lack of affordable housing, by sourcing it from a private sector that has shown itself completely incapable of delivering housing at an affordable price. And what we need is the state to deliver directly, as it can, affordable housing at cost price for public and affordable housing, and indeed for affordable student accommodation, all of which we face a dire crisis in.
Deputy Murphy, I wanted to ask, maybe, I know that you were a big proponent of this idea of zero COVID. Are you worried with the level of COVID cases that we're seeing every day? Are you happy to be back here in Leinster House? Do you still think that we should be going for that? Are you surprised with what Dr. Tony Houlihan had to say to the Committee on Health?
No, I wasn't surprised by what he had to say. I mean, the key thing for us is that the schools are able to stay open safely. And I think the government hasn't done everything that needs to be done to give our maximum chance of being able to do that. So the failure to have CO2 monitors, as Gina was pointing out, in every classroom is just a very blatant failure. And very obvious. I mean, we've known for over a year that COVID, a major form of transmission of COVID, is airborne, and therefore questions of ventilation are absolutely key. So having the monitors, having the HEPA filters, which may be necessary in some classrooms at relatively small cost, it's a real shame that the government hasn't done those things, so I'd certainly be concerned. But the other point is, with people going back to the workplace, one key point we'd make is that where workers have been working well and safely away from the workplace and would prefer to continue to do so, they should not be put under any obligation to move their work back into the workplace, because for every extra person that we have travelling in public transport, Going into offices, etc., it obviously increases the risk. So workers shouldn't be compelled to go back into the workplace if they can continue to work from home. And the other point is we will be moving our ventilation bill, which we launched just before the Dail broke, as far as I remember, just after the Dail broke. We'll be moving it at first stage, either this week or probably next week, because we think that's crucial going into the future, that in pubs, in restaurants, in indoor workplaces, in schools, people need to have safe ventilation.
Great, thanks everyone.
Thank you.